While money may not buy happiness, its absence is the ultimate truth serum. Convinced he was finally shedding the dead weight of a broke nobody, David heartlessly threw his pregnant wife into the freezing cold. However, his arrogance blinded him to the truth. That shivering woman on his doorstep wasn't merely Phoebe the starving artist. She was the hidden crown jewel of the Harrington Empire, an heiress with resources that make David's bank account look like pocket change. The Harringtons don't just seek revenge, they acquire the competition. Get ready for the story of a lifetime's worst mistake. The rain in Seattle doesn't wash things clean, it just makes the dirt stick harder. It was 11:45 p.m. on a Tuesday in November. The wind was howling off the Puget Sound, rattling the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Sterling estate in Medina. Inside, the fire was warm, but the atmosphere was sub-zero. Phoebe Sterling stood in the foyer of the house she had spent the last 3 years cleaning, decorating, and turning into a home. She was shivering, not from the cold. The heating was set to a perfect 72 degrees, but from the shock. Her hands were instinctively wrapped around her stomach, protecting the secret she had planned to share over dinner. 4 months. She was 4 months pregnant. Across from her stood David, her husband, the man who had promised to love her until the end of time. He was sipping a glass of Macallan 25, looking at her with an expression of pure, unadulterated boredom. "David, please," Phoebe whispered, her voice cracking. "It's pouring outside. My car, the transmission is shot. I have nowhere to go." David sighed, setting the crystal glass down on the marble console table. "Phoebe, we've been over this for an hour. This marriage isn't working. It hasn't worked for months. You're stagnant. I'm scaling Sterling Tech to $1 billion evaluation, and you're still painting watercolor flowers in the guest room. We aren't compatible anymore." Compatible? Phoebe took a step forward. "I supported you when you were coding in a basement. I worked double shifts at the diner to pay for the servers. And I paid you back." David snapped his handsome face, twisting into a sneer. "I paid off your student loans. I bought you this car. I gave you 3 years of luxury you could never afford on your own. We're square." Then the click of heels on the hardwood floor echoed from the hallway. Phoebe froze. Walking into the foyer was Chloe Dubois, David's chief marketing officer. She was wearing a silk robe. Phoebe's silk robe. The one David had gifted her for their 2nd anniversary. Chloe didn't look ashamed. She looked victorious. She leaned against the doorframe, checking her perfectly manicured nails. "David, honey. Is she still here? The movers are coming at 8 a.m. to redecorate. We need the space clear." The realization hit Phoebe like a physical blow. It wasn't just about growing apart. You're with her?" Phoebe asked, her voice barely audible. David walked over to Chloe, wrapping an arm around her waist. "Chloe understands the vision, Phoebe. She's an asset. You're a liability. Look, I'm not a monster. I put $5,000 in your account. That's enough for a deposit on an apartment somewhere. Elsewhere. But you need to leave. Now." "I'm pregnant," Phoebe blurted out. The room went silent. The only sound was the rain lashing against the glass. David stared at her. For a second, Phoebe saw a flicker of hesitation. Then Chloe let out a sharp, cruel laugh. "Oh, please," Chloe scoffed. "The oldest trick in the book, the anchor baby David, don't fall for it. She's desperate." David's face hardened. The hesitation vanished, replaced by cold fury. "Get out, Phoebe. Don't lie to me to try and stay in a house you don't belong in. If you're not gone in 5 minutes, I'm calling security to escort you off the property." Phoebe looked at the man she loved. She looked at the woman wearing her clothes. She realized then that begging would strip her of the only thing she had left, her dignity. She didn't cry. The tears stopped instantly, replaced by a cold, hollow numbness. She grabbed her duffel bag, the only thing she had packed in her haste, and walked to the heavy oak door. She paused her hand on the brass handle. She didn't look back. "You're right, David," she said, her voice steady for the first time that night. "We are square. Remember that." She opened the door and stepped into the storm. The wind ripped the door from her hand and slammed it shut behind her. The motel was called the Bluebird, but there was nothing colorful about it. Located 20 miles outside the city, it smelled of stale cigarettes and industrial cleaner. Phoebe sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, her wet clothes clinging to her skin. It had been 3 days. She had $5,000 in her account. To a normal person, that was a safety net. To Phoebe, who knew the cost of prenatal care and rent in Seattle, it was a ticking clock. She looked at her reflection in the cracked mirror. She looked haggard, pale, broken. But appearances were deceiving. David knew Phoebe as Phoebe Miller, the orphan from Ohio, who moved to Seattle on a scholarship and worked as a waitress. He knew her as the quiet girl who loved art and hated conflict. He didn't know that Miller was the maiden name of her grandmother. He didn't know that she wasn't from Ohio. She was from Manhattan, Upper East Side, 10,021. She was Phoebe Harrington, daughter of William Harrington, the patriarch of Harrington Global, a private equity firm that quietly owned half the infrastructure in North America. She had left home 5 years ago, running away from a life that felt like a suffocating golden cage. She wanted to be loved for her, not for the 10-figure inheritance attached to her name. She wanted to know if she could survive on her own. She had found David. She thought she had found love. She had kept her secret, waiting for the right moment, waiting until they were truly established to reveal that they never had to worry about money again. She reached into the lining of her duffel bag. Most people hide money in the lining. Phoebe hid a phone. It was an old model, a burner phone she kept charged but never turned on. She pressed the power button. The screen flickered to life. There was only one number saved in the contacts: Dad. Her finger hovered over the call button. She remembered the last thing her father had said to her 5 years ago, standing in the library of their Hamptons estate. "If you walk out that door, Phoebe, you do it on your own. You want the real world, you go live in it. But when you break, and you will break, you call me. But you don't call until you're ready to be a Harrington again." Was she ready? She touched her stomach. It wasn't just about her anymore. She had a child to protect, a child who was currently homeless because its father wanted to upgrade to a marketing executive. A flash of anger, hot and unfamiliar, surged through her. David hadn't just broken her heart. He had endangered her child. He had treated her like garbage because he thought she was powerless. She wasn't powerless. She was just dormant. She pressed the call button. It rang twice. "Phoebe." The voice was deep, gravelly, and instantly commanded attention. William Harrington didn't say hello. He didn't ask who it was. He knew. "Daddy," Phoebe whispered, and finally the tears she had held back in the mansion came pouring out. I made a mistake." There was a pause on the line. "Where are you?" "Seattle. A motel off I-5. "Are you safe?" "For tonight." But I'm pregnant, Dad. And I'm alone. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for 10 seconds. When William spoke again, his voice had dropped an octave. It was the voice he used when he was about to acquire a hostile company and dismantle it piece by piece. "You are not alone," William said, "and you are certainly not a mistake. Stay put. I'm sending James. He's in San Francisco. He'll be there in 2 hours." "Dad, I don't want to come home defeated," Phoebe sobbed. "You're not coming home defeated, sweetie," William said, a terrifying calmness entering his tone. "You're coming home to strategize. Who did this? David, my husband. The tech boy." William let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "Tell me, Phoebe. Does he know?" "No, he thinks I'm nobody." "Good," William said. "Keep it that way. It makes the acquisition much cheaper." 3 months later, David Sterling felt like a king. Sterling Tech had just landed the cover of Forbes. The headline read, "The New Gods of Silicon Valley." He was standing in his office, overlooking the Seattle skyline, wearing a bespoke suit that cost more than his father's car. Chloe walked in, carrying a tablet. She looked stressed. "David, we have a problem with the Series B funding," she said, dropping the tablet on his desk. David waved a hand dismissively. "What problem? We have investors lining up." "We did," Chloe corrected. "But Vanguard Ventures just pulled out. So did BlackRock. And the bank just called about the mortgage on the new headquarters." "What?" David spun around. "Why, they said our liquidity ratio is too risky. David, we spent $40 million in the last quarter on expansion and lifestyle." David grit his teeth. Lifestyle meant the renovations Chloe demanded for the house, the trips to Saint-Tropez, the new Porsche. "It's fine," David said, though sweat began to prickle his hairline. "We just need one big whale, one private investor to bridge the gap until the IPO." "There is one," Chloe said, scrolling through her tablet. "A holding company out of New York called Obsidian Capital. They've been buying up distressed tech assets all month. They expressed interest in a majority stake." "Obsidian," David frowned. "Never heard of them. Who's the CEO?" "It's opaque, represented by a lawyer named Arthur Pendergast, but their money is green. They want a meeting next week at the Grand Pacific Gala." "Set it up," David said, straightening his tie. "I can charm anyone. We get this Obsidian money, we go public, and we're billionaires, Chloe. Nothing stops us." Meanwhile, in New York, Phoebe sat in the boardroom of the Harrington building on Fifth Avenue. The glass walls offered a view of Central Park, currently dusted in snow. She looked different. The mousy brown hair was gone, replaced by her natural rich honey blonde, styled in a sharp power bob. The oversized sweaters were gone, replaced by a tailored Givenchy maternity dress that highlighted her 7-month bump. She wasn't Phoebe Miller anymore. She was Phoebe Harrington. At the head of the table sat her father, William. To her right was her brother, James, 6'3", former Harvard rowing captain and the most ruthless negotiator in New York. "The trap is set," James said, sliding a dossier across the mahogany table. "Obsidian Capital, which is of course a shell company wholly owned by us, has secured the meeting with Sterling. He's desperate. He's leveraged the house, the company, everything." Phoebe opened the dossier. She saw a photo of David and Chloe laughing at a nightclub. She felt nothing but cold resolve. "He thinks he's meeting an investor," Phoebe said softly. "He's meeting his executioner," William said, sipping his coffee. "Phoebe, are you sure you want to do this yourself? James can handle the meeting." Phoebe looked up. Her eyes, usually so soft, were hard as diamonds. He threw my child out into the rain, Dad. He told me I was a liability. Phoebe closed the dossier. I want to look him in the eye when he realizes that the liability just bought his life. The Grand Pacific Gala is next Saturday, James said. We've arranged for the house, your old house, to be the venue. David put it up as collateral for a short-term loan he defaulted on yesterday. The bank is seizing it quietly, but we bought the note this morning. Wait, Phoebe said. He doesn't know he doesn't own the house anymore. James smiled a shark-like grin. Not yet. We're letting him host the gala there. He thinks he's showing off his success. In reality, he's throwing a party in your house. Phoebe stood up. Get the jet ready. We're going to Seattle. The night of the Grand Pacific Gala arrived, draped in the kind of opulence that screams new money. David had pulled out all the stops. He had hired a Michelin star catering team, flown in orchids from Thailand, and invited the top 200 members of Seattle's elite. The venue, the Sterling estate, his house, or so he thought. David stood at the top of the grand staircase, smoothing the lapels of his tuxedo. He looked down at the swirling crowd of investors, tech moguls, and politicians. He should have felt triumphant. Instead, he felt a gnawing nausea. "Stop fidgeting," Chloe hissed in his ear. She was wearing a red dress that was tight enough to cut off circulation, clutching a glass of champagne like a weapon. "Arthur Pendergast is here. The lawyer for Obsidian Capital. He's in the library." "Is the principal here?" David asked, scanning the room. "The CEO of Obsidian." Pendergast said the CEO is arriving shortly. Special entry. They want to make an entrance. David swallowed hard. If this deal doesn't close tonight, Chloe, the bank takes the keys on Monday. You know that, right? "It will close," Chloe snapped. "Just charm them. And for God's sake, don't mention your ex-wife. Investors hate messy personal lives." At 8:15 p.m., the music stopped. A hush fell over the room as the heavy oak front doors, the same doors Phoebe had been pushed out of 3 months ago, swung open. Usually guests arrived via the driveway, but the new arrivals had come in a convoy of 3 armored Cadillac Escalades that pulled right up to the portico flanking a vintage 1960 Rolls-Royce Phantom. Security stepped aside. A man entered first. It was James Harrington. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him like armor. He didn't look like a tech bro. He looked like old-world power. He scanned the room with a predator's gaze, silencing the murmurs. Then he turned and offered his hand to the person behind him. A woman stepped into the light. The room collectively gasped. She was stunning. She wore a midnight blue velvet gown that cascaded to the floor off the shoulder, revealing a diamond necklace that likely cost more than the entire house. The dress was cut to elegantly accommodate her 7-month pregnancy, turning her baby bump into a statement of regal power rather than a hindrance. Her hair was a sleek golden bob. Her makeup was flawless. But it was her eyes, cold blue and piercing, that held the room captive. David squinted from the top of the stairs. She looked familiar. The curve of her jaw, the way she held her head. But no, it couldn't be. "Who is that?" Chloe whispered, her jealousy flaring instantly. The woman didn't look at the crowd. She looked up, straight at David. She didn't smile. "That," a voice beside David said it was his CFO, pale as a ghost. "That's Phoebe Harrington, the heiress to the Harrington global fortune." David frowned. "Harrington? No, that looks like Phoebe. My Phoebe. But Phoebe is a waitress from Ohio." "David," the CFO whispered, terrified. Harrington Global owns the bank that holds our debt. They own the media company that ran the Forbes article. They own basically everything. David felt the blood drain from his face. He watched as the woman began to ascend the stairs, flanked by James and 2 large security guards. The crowd parted for her, like the Red Sea. She stopped 3 steps below David. They were eye to eye. Up close, the illusion of the poor waitress shattered completely. This woman smelled of oud wood and money. "Hello, David," she said. Her voice was the same, but the timbre was different. It carried the weight of a billion-dollar empire. David stuttered. "Phoebe." "What? What are you doing here? You crashed my gala." Chloe stepped forward, blocking David. "Excuse me, you can't just waltz in here." Security. James Harrington stepped up, towering over Chloe. He didn't raise his voice. He just handed her a business card. "I wouldn't do that, Ms. Dubois, unless you want to be escorted out of your own party by federal marshals." Phoebe didn't even look at Chloe. She kept her eyes locked on David. "We have a meeting, don't we?" Phoebe said smoothly. "Obsidian Capital is ready to hear your pitch. Shall we go to the study? I believe you know the way." The study was soundproof. The roar of the party outside was reduced to a dull hum. David sat behind his desk, trembling. Chloe stood by the window looking like a trapped animal. On the other side of the desk sat Phoebe and James. Phoebe rested her hands on her stomach, looking around the room. "You changed the curtains," she noted idly. "I liked the floral ones. These grey ones are depressing." "Phoebe, what is going on?" David demanded, trying to regain some semblance of control. "You're the investor. You're Obsidian." "I am the chairwoman of the board for Obsidian Capital," Phoebe corrected. "My family office manages a portfolio of $300 billion. Obsidian is just a hobby project I started 3 months ago." David laughed nervously. "This is a joke. You're Phoebe Miller. You scrubbed these floors. You worked at a diner. I wanted to see if someone could love me." "For me?" Phoebe said, her voice dropping to a whisper that cut deeper than a scream. "I wanted to know if a man would stand by me when I had nothing. I got my answer that night in the rain, didn't I?" David flinched. "Phoebe, look, I was under pressure. The company. I made a mistake. We can fix this. If you have capital, we can merge. Think about it. You, me, the baby. We can be a power couple. I'm the face of tech. You're the money." Chloe whipped her head around. "Excuse me, you and me." David ignored her. He leaned over the desk, his eyes wide with greed. "Phoebe, baby, I didn't know. If I had known who you were, and that," James interrupted, disgust dripping from his voice, "is exactly the problem." Phoebe pulled a leather folder from her bag. She slid it across the desk. "This isn't a merger, David." David opened the folder. It was a contract, but it wasn't an investment agreement. "What is this?" David asked, reading the legal jargon. "Asset purchase agreement, foreclosure, notice. Sterling Tech is insolvent," Phoebe explained calmly. "You cooked the books to get that Forbes cover. You inflated your user numbers. That's fraud, David. My analysts found it in about 4 hours of due diligence." "That's a lie," Chloe shouted. "It's in the audit," James said. "We bought your debt from the bank this morning, all of it. The corporate loans, the personal loans, and the mortgage on this house." David froze. "You're in default," Phoebe said, "which means Obsidian Capital is exercising its right to seize collateral. Immediately." David stood up, slamming his hands on the desk. "You can't do that. I have rights. This is my house." "Actually," Phoebe said, standing up slowly. It's my house. Again. And unlike you, I paid cash. She walked over to the window, looking out at the rain that had started to fall, a poetic echo of the night she left. You have two options, David, Phoebe said, turning back to him. Option A. We release the audit to the SEC. You go to prison for securities fraud. Chloe goes to prison as an accomplice. The company goes bankrupt, and you leave here in handcuffs tonight. David audibly gasped. Chloe began to sob. Option B, Phoebe continued. You sign the company over to Obsidian for $1. You resign as CEO immediately. You sign a non-disclosure agreement, and you vacate the premises. Tonight. Tonight, David choked out. But the party, everyone is outside. I know, Phoebe said, her eyes flashing with cold fire. It will be very embarrassing for you when the announcement is made. But that's the price of doing business. And the baby? David asked, playing his last card. You can't keep my child from me. I have rights as a father. Phoebe smiled. It was a terrifying smile. James? She asked. James tossed a thick envelope onto the desk. Photos of you and Chloe doing lines of coke in the bathroom of a club last week. Bank statements showing you used company funds for escorts, and a recording of you threatening to drag Phoebe out by her hair if she didn't leave the night you kicked her out. We have the security footage, David. You forgot to delete the cloud backup. James leaned in. You will sign full custody over to Phoebe. If you ever try to contact her or the child, I will release this file to the press, the police, and your mother. Do you understand? David looked at the photos. He looked at the contract. He looked at the woman he had thrown away. He realized with a sickening thud in his chest that he was small. He had always been small. She had just been standing on her knees to meet him at eye level. Now she was standing up. With a shaking hand, David picked up the pen. The silence inside the mahogany-paneled study was so heavy it felt like it had physical weight pressing down on David's chest, making it hard to breathe. Outside the heavy oak doors, the muffled bass of the gala's DJ thumped rhythmically, a heartbeat of a party that was celebrating a corpse. David sat behind his massive glass desk, a desk he had custom-ordered from Italy 3 months ago. Across from him sat Phoebe. She didn't look like an ex-wife. She didn't look like a scorned woman. She looked like a judge. James Harrington stood by the fireplace, leaning casually against the mantel, watching David with the dispassionate interest of a scientist observing a bug under a microscope. This is insane, David stammered, his confident baritone reduced to a thin, reedy squeak. He looked at the legal documents spread out before him. The words swam before his eyes. Notice of default. Immediate foreclosure. Asset seizure. It's not insane, David, Phoebe said, her voice calm and smooth, like a blade sliding through silk. It's math. You borrowed against the company to pay for the house. You borrowed against the house to pay for the marketing. And you borrowed against your personal assets to cover the interest. It's a house of cards, and I just pulled the bottom card. I have investors, David yelled, standing up. He tried to muster the arrogance that had served him so well in Silicon Valley. Vanguard is calling me tomorrow. Once the Series B closes, I can pay this off. I can pay you off. Double. Triple. James laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. David, you don't get it. Vanguard isn't calling. Neither is BlackRock. We spoke to them this morning. David froze. You... What? We own the risk assessment firm they use, James explained, checking his watch. My analysts sent over a file regarding Sterling Tech's user retention numbers. The real numbers, not the ones you cooked up for that Forbes article. David fell back into his chair, as if his strings had been cut. His face went grey. Beside him, Chloe, who had been standing defiantly with her arms crossed, slowly uncrossed them. She took a half step away from David. "You cooked the books," Chloe whispered, horror dawning on her face. "David, you told me we were profitable. You told me the burn rate was under control." "It was a bridge strategy." David snapped at her, sweat beading on his forehead. "Everyone does it." "Fake it till you make it. That's called securities fraud," Phoebe interjected softly, "and it carries a prison sentence of up to 20 years. The room went dead silent again. The word prison hung in the air. Phoebe leaned forward. She placed her hands on the desk. Hands that were manicured and adorned with a single tasteful diamond ring that was worth more than David's entire fictional net worth. "Let's talk options," Phoebe said. "Because I'm generous, and because I don't want the father of my child to be a felon, mostly for the child's sake, I'm giving you a choice." She held up one finger. Option A. We release the audit to the SEC and the FBI tonight. By tomorrow morning, Sterling Tech is raided. Your assets are frozen. You are arrested. Chloe is arrested as an accomplice since she signed off on the marketing materials containing the false data. You both go to federal prison. The scandal destroys you completely. Chloe let out a strangled sob. "I didn't know. You can't put me in jail. I'm just the CMO. "Ignorance is not a legal defense when your signature is on the prospectus, Ms. Dubois," James noted coldly. Phoebe held up a second finger. "Option B. You sign everything over. Now, the company. The intellectual property, the office leases, and this estate. You transfer 100% of the equity to Obsidian Capital for the consideration of $1. $1, David choked out. This company is worth $500 million. This company is worth negative $40 million in debt, Phoebe corrected. I'm buying your debt, David. I'm doing you a favor. You walk away clean. No prison, no FBI. You just disappear. You resign as CEO, immediately citing health reasons, and you leave this house tonight. David looked around the room. This was his kingdom. He had sacrificed everything for this. He had thrown Phoebe out into a freezing rainstorm for this. And the baby? David asked. His eyes darted between Phoebe and the contract. He saw a lifeline. I have rights. If I sign, I want custody rights. I want visitation. I want my name on the birth certificate. Phoebe's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. She didn't speak. She just looked at James. James walked over to the desk and dropped a thick manila envelope onto the glass. It landed with a heavy thud. We anticipated you might try to use the child as a bargaining chip, James said. Go ahead. Open it. David's hands shook as he opened the clasp. He pulled out a stack of photographs. His blood ran cold. They were high-resolution photos taken inside a private club in downtown Seattle. Photos of him doing lines of cocaine off a glass table. Photos of him with women who were definitely not Chloe. There's more, James said, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. We have the audio recording from the security system the night you kicked Phoebe out. We have you on tape calling your unborn child an anchor and threatening to have security physically drag your pregnant wife onto the street. James leaned in, towering over the seated David. If you try to claim so much as a weekend of visitation, I will release these photos to the press. I will play that tape for a family court judge, and I will make sure the entire world knows exactly what kind of man David Sterling is. You won't just lose custody, David. You will be pariah. David looked at the photos. He looked at Chloe, who was staring at the pictures of the other women with a mix of shock and fury. He was checkmated, completely and utterly. Tears of frustration and self-pity welled in his eyes. "I built this," he whispered. "No," Phoebe said, standing up. "You borrowed it. And now the bill is due." She slid a black Mont Blanc pen across the desk. "Sign the papers, David." David picked up the pen. It felt heavy as lead. With a trembling hand, he signed his name on the dotted line. David Sterling. Then again on the resignation letter. Then again on the deed transfer. Every scratch of the pen was a nail in the coffin of his ego. When he finished, he dropped the pen. He felt hollowed out. "Done," James said, snatching the papers away instantly. "The transfer is electronic. It's already filed." Phoebe looked at her watch. "You have 10 minutes to vacate the premises. Take your personal items only. Anything purchased with company funds, which is everything in this room, stays." David stood up. He felt unsteady. He looked at Chloe. "Chloe," he said, his voice weak. "Let's go. We'll figure something out. We can go to your condo." Chloe stood frozen. Her eyes were darting between David the broken crying fraud and Phoebe the billionaire heiress who radiated power. Chloe was a survivor. She did the math. "I'm not going with you," Chloe said, her voice sharp. David recoiled as if slapped. "What, babe, we're in this together." "No, we aren't," Chloe spat. She turned to Phoebe, plastering a desperate, pleading smile on her face. "Ms. Harrington." "Phoebe, please, I was manipulated. He lied to me about the finances. I'm a victim here. I can help you. I know the marketing strategy. I know the client list. Keep me on. Please, I can be an asset to Obsidian." David stared at her, his mouth agape. The betrayal cut deeper than the bankruptcy. "Chloe." Phoebe looked at Chloe. She looked at the woman wearing the red dress that Phoebe had bought the woman who had mocked her pregnancy in the foyer just months ago. Phoebe walked around the desk. She stopped inches from Chloe. "You think because you turned on him, you're safe?" Phoebe asked softly. "You watched him throw a pregnant woman into a storm, and you laughed. You tried to erase me from my own life." Phoebe's eyes hardened. "You're fired, Chloe. Effectively, immediately. And don't bother updating your LinkedIn. I've already spoken to the heads of every major marketing firm in Seattle, San Francisco, and New York. You are blacklisted. No one will hire you. You'll be lucky to get a job managing social media for a hot dog stand." Chloe gasped, tears erupting instantly. "You can't do that." "I already did," Phoebe said calmly. She pointed to the door. "Get out!" Chloe wailed, grabbing her purse and sprinting out of the room, leaving David alone with the lions. David looked at Phoebe one last time. He wanted to say something, an apology, a beg, an insult, but he found he had no words left. He was small. He had always been small. "Goodbye, David," Phoebe said, turning her back on him to look out the window. David turned and walked out of the study. The transition was jarring. He stepped from the silent, suffocating tension of the study back into the roar of the gala. The party was at its peak. Champagne corks were popping. The string quartet had been replaced by a jazz band. People smiled at him as he passed. "Great party, David," a tech CEO shouted, raising a glass. "Hey, Sterling, let's talk about that merger next week," a banker yelled. They didn't know. They were toasting a ghost. David walked through the crowd, feeling like he was in a nightmare. He wanted to scream at them to stop, but he kept his head down, clutching his phone, the only thing he owned. He reached the grand foyer. The massive crystal chandelier sparkled overhead. He remembered the day he bought it, bragging to Phoebe that it cost more than her parents' house. He didn't know then that her parents' house was a $20 million estate in the Hamptons. He opened the heavy front door. The weather had turned. A squall had blown in off the Sound. The rain was coming down in sheets sideways, driven by a biting wind. David stepped onto the porch. The valet stand was chaotic. "Ticket, sir?" the valet asked. I don't have a ticket," David muttered. "It's the Porsche, the 911 GT3. It's right there." He pointed to his car parked prominently in the front spot. The valet looked at a clipboard. "I'm sorry, sir. We've been instructed that vehicle remains on the property. It's registered to Sterling Technologies." "It's my car!" David screamed, snapping. "Give me the damn keys." "Security," the valet signaled. Two large men in dark suits stepped out of the shadows. They weren't the rented mall cops David had hired. They were Harrington Private Security. "Mr. Sterling," the lead guard said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "You are trespassing. You need to leave the property on foot." "On foot?" David looked at the long, winding driveway. It was a mile to the main gate. The rain was torrential. "I don't have a coat. I don't have an umbrella." "You should have thought of that before you threw your wife out in a storm," the guard said. He didn't smile. David looked back at the house. Through the open doors he heard the music die down. A voice came over the PA system. It was James. His voice boomed through the estate, reaching even the driveway. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. I have a special announcement. As of this evening, Sterling Tech has been fully acquired by Obsidian Capital. The previous management has departed. Please raise your glasses to the new owner of this estate and the chairwoman of the board. Phoebe Harrington." A roar of applause erupted from the house. A thunderous, cheering ovation. They were clapping for her. The people David had spent years trying to impress were cheering for his destruction. David turned away. He stepped off the covered porch and into the rain. Within seconds, his bespoke tuxedo was soaked. His hair was plastered to his skull. The freezing water ran down his neck, sending shivers through his body. He began to walk. His Gucci loafers slipped on the wet pavement. He stumbled, falling hard onto his hands and knees in the mud beside the driveway. He gasped. The wind knocked out of him. He looked down at his hands covered in cold black mud. He looked back at the house one last time. The windows were glowing with golden light. He could see silhouettes dancing. It looked warm. It looked like heaven, and he was cast out. He pushed himself up, wiping the mud on his pants, and kept walking into the dark, cold night. He was alone. He was broke. And for the first time in his life, David Sterling saw himself clearly. He wasn't a billionaire. He wasn't a genius. He was just a man who had held a diamond in his hand, mistook it for glass, and threw it away. 6 months later, the relentless grey drizzle of the Pacific Northwest had finally broken, giving way to a spring so vibrant it felt like an apology from the universe. The Medina estate, once a fortress of cold glass and monochrome minimalism under David's reign, had been transformed. The stark grey curtains that David had insisted upon, claiming they optimized focus, were gone. In their place hung soft, cream-colored linens that danced in the breeze coming off Lake Washington. The crypto trading den, a room previously filled with humming servers and blinking LED lights was unrecognizable. It was now painted a soothing shade of sage green. Soft rugs covered the hardwood, and the only sound was the rhythmic, hypnotic ticking of a vintage grandfather clock. Phoebe stood in the center of the sunroom, a place she had once been forbidden to enter, while David was working, which usually meant playing video games. She held a paintbrush in her hand. For 3 years, her art had been confined to a small sketchbook hidden in a drawer. Now, a massive canvas stood before her, capturing the majesty of the Olympic mountains bathed in morning light. She wasn't hiding anymore. From the nursery down the hall came a sound that stopped her heart every time she heard it, a soft, bubbling coo. Phoebe wiped her hands on a rag and walked toward the room. She stopped in the doorway, leaning against the frame, a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. William Harrington, the Iron Wolf of Wall Street, the man whose mere whisper could tank a stock price, was sitting in a rocking chair. He had discarded his suit jacket, his tie was loosened, and he was holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket embroidered with the initial L. "You have quite the grip, don't you?" William whispered to the infant, his voice dropping from its usual boardroom boom to a gentle rumble. "Yes, you do. You have the Harrington grip. You're going to hold on to things tight. You won't let go like your foolish father did." "Careful, Dad," Phoebe said softly, stepping into the room. "You'll spoil him before he can even walk." William looked up. His eyes, usually hard as flint, were wet. "He's a Harrington, Phoebe. He's meant to be spoiled. Besides, he needs to know who his family is. He needs to know he is safe." Phoebe reached down and stroked the baby's cheek. Leo. He was 2 months old, with eyes as blue as the ocean and a tuft of golden hair. "He knows," Phoebe said. "He'll never know a cold night. He'll never know what it's like to be locked out." Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Heavy, purposeful strides. James appeared in the doorway. He looked different than he had the night of the gala. The predatory edge was softened, though not gone. He was wearing a cashmere sweater and holding a tablet. "Am I interrupting the family meeting?" James asked, a smirk playing on his lips. "Just grandpa duties." William grunted, though he didn't make a move to put Leo down. "What's the update, James?" James tapped the screen of his tablet. "The autopsy is complete." Phoebe stiffened slightly. She knew what he meant. "Sterling Tech?" she asked. "Dismantled," James said, his tone clinical. "We finished the liquidation this morning. It was surgical. We sold the server farms to Amazon for parts. The patent portfolio, what little of it was actually unique, went to Google. The real estate holdings were liquidated to cover the outstanding debts." "And the profit?" William asked, looking up from the baby. "After settling the debts and the legal fees," James said, "Obsidian Capital netted a 42% return on the acquisition. Ironically, David's company was worth more dead than it ever was alive." Phoebe walked over to the window, looking out at the manicured gardens. "He was so proud of that brand," she mused. "He valued that logo more than he valued his marriage." "The logo is gone," James said. "The website is a 404 error page. The signage on the downtown office was removed yesterday. It's as if Sterling Tech never existed." "And David?" Phoebe asked. She didn't ask with longing. She didn't ask with anger. She asked with the distant curiosity one might have about a storm that had passed through town weeks ago. James hesitated for a fraction of a second. "He's in Tacoma, living in a studio apartment above a laundromat. His credit is shot, so he couldn't get a lease anywhere decent. He's working as a shift manager at a big box electronics store." "Fitting," William muttered. "He reached out. James added, watching Phoebe carefully. He sent a letter to the foundation, and he's called the main switchboard 3 times. Phoebe turned around. Her face was serene. He wants to know about the baby, she guessed. He wants to know if there's a severance package, James corrected, and he mentioned he's willing to talk about custody if we settle a cash amount. The air in the room grew cold. William's hand tightened protectively around the baby. "Burn it," Phoebe said. Her voice didn't waver. "Burn the letter. Block the number. If he shows up within 500 yards of this house, or Leo enforce the restraining order." "Understood," James said. He had his chance. Phoebe continued looking at her son. He had a wife who adored him and a child on the way. He chose a marketing strategy. He chose a lifestyle. He doesn't get to come back now that the lifestyle is gone. "He's the past, Phoebe," James said gently. "You're the future." Phoebe nodded. She walked over and took Leo from her father's arms. The baby gurgled, reaching up to grab her finger. "Come on," she said to her family. "The photographer is here for the press release. The new Harrington grant for single mothers launches today. I want Leo in the picture." "A $50 million grant," William said proudly, standing up. "That's going to change a lot of lives, sweetheart. It's going to make sure no woman has to stand in the rain again," Phoebe said. Meanwhile, 30 miles south, the break room of Electromart smelled of stale popcorn, burnt coffee, and floor wax. It was a windowless box with fluorescent lights that buzzed incessantly, inducing a low-grade migraine that David Sterling had lived with for 6 weeks. David sat on a plastic crate, staring at a sandwich wrapped in cling film. It was soggy. He looked at his hands. They were dry and cracked from moving boxes in the warehouse all morning. The expensive manicure he used to get weekly was a distant memory. The Rolex was gone, sold to pay for the deposit on his efficiency apartment. He wore a blue polo shirt that was a size too small with a name tag that read, "Dave, trainee." "Hey, Dave!" a voice shouted from the doorway. David flinched. It was Kyle, the 19-year-old assistant manager. "Yeah, Kyle," David said, his voice weary. "You messed up the inventory on the PS5s again, man," Kyle said, popping gum. "The system says we have 4, but there are only 3 on the shelf. You gotta pay attention to detail, bro. Corporate is on my back." I'll fix it," David muttered. Pay attention to detail. He used to give keynotes on attention to detail to audiences of thousands. "Whatever, just hurry up. Breaks over in 2 minutes," Kyle said, turning to leave. "Oh, turn the TV up. My show is over. The news is on." Kyle left. David sighed and looked up at the cheap flat-screen TV mounted on the wall. It was the local news at noon. The anchor was smiling. And in our top story today, a massive philanthropic announcement from the Harrington Foundation. Phoebe Harrington, the new chairwoman, has pledged $50 million to support emergency housing for pregnant women in crisis. David stopped breathing. The screen cut to a live feed. It was the terrace of the Medina estate. His estate. Phoebe was standing at a podium. She looked breathtaking. She wore a white power suit that made her glow against the backdrop of the lake. She looked strong. She looked happy. And in her arms, she held a baby. The camera zoomed in. The baby had golden hair and bright blue eyes. David dropped his sandwich. It hit the dirty linoleum floor with a wet splat. "That's," David whispered, his throat closing up. "That's him." On the screen, a reporter asked Phoebe a question. "Ms. Harrington, what inspired this grant?" Phoebe looked directly into the camera. For a second, David felt like she was looking right through the screen into the dingy break room, staring straight into his soul. I learned the hard way that life can change in an instant. Phoebe said, her voice clear and strong. I learned that sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones who hurt you the most. But I also learned that rock bottom is a solid foundation to build an empire on. This grant is for the women who are still in the storm. I want them to know you are not garbage. You are gold, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. She smiled, looked down at the baby, and kissed his forehead. The crowd behind her cheered. William and James stood on either side of her like royal guards. The segment ended. The screen cut to a commercial for a car insurance company. David sat there frozen. The image of the life he could have had burned in his mind. He could have been standing next to her. He could have been holding that baby. He could have been the father of the heir to the Harrington fortune. He had held a diamond in his hand, and he had thrown it into the mud because he thought it was a pebble. "Dave," Kyle yelled from the hallway. "Spill on aisle 4. Kid dropped a blue slushy, bring the mop." David looked at the black screen. A single tear tracked through the grime on his cheek. "I'm coming," David whispered. He stood up. He walked past the soggy sandwich on the floor. He went to the janitor's closet, picked up the mop bucket, and walked out to clean up someone else's mess. And that is where our story ends. David learned the excruciating truth that karma isn't just a concept, it's a mirror. He treated people like disposable assets, only to find himself disposed of when his perceived value dropped to 0. He chased the illusion of a better life and ran right past the greatest treasure he already held in his hands. Phoebe's journey reminds us of a powerful truth. Your value does not decrease based on someone's inability to see your worth. She didn't just survive the storm. She bought the land the storm was raging on. Sometimes you have to be thrown out into the cold to realize that you carry the fire within you. If you enjoyed this story of justice, redemption, and the ultimate comeback, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and tells us you want more stories like this. I have a question for you. Do you feel sorry for David at the end? Or did he get exactly what he deserved? I want to hear your thoughts. Type justice in the comments below if you think Phoebe made the right choice, or mercy if you think she went too far. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story. We have a shocking tale coming up next week about a lottery winner who hid his ticket from his greedy family for 10 years. You won't want to miss that one. Thanks for watching, and remember, be careful who you step on your way up, because you might meet them on your way down. See you next time.